Let's now move to the ninth task under the process domain, which is integrate project planning activities. PMP exam evaluates your ability to integrate various project planning components to ensure the alignment, visibility, and continuous business value. Questions may assess how well you consolidate the plans, identify dependencies, gaps, and also use data driven decision making to guide the project execution. Integration ensures that all project management activities remain coordinated and that the project objectives align with the stakeholder expectation. The first point here we have to cover is how to consolidate the project phases or plans. And a key exam focus here is to test your ability to integrate different subsidiary plans like the scope plan, the management or the schedule plan, the cost management plan, the risk management plan, and the procurement orchestra into a comprehensive project management plan. And this process ensures that all elements of planning work works together efficiently. So expect some scenario-based questions requiring you to determine how best to consolidate and synchronize planning efforts across different teams, business units, or project phases to ensure that all of the deliverables, schedules, and resource plans aligns with the project goals. Next key point here we have to cover under this task is to assess consolidated project plans for dependencies, gaps, and continuous business value. Project plans must be assessed for the interdependencies or missing elements and alignment with the business objectives. The PMP exam may test your ability to identify a task dependencies like finish to start, start to finish, start to start, or the other, let's say, finish to start or start to finish. All of these dependencies or types of dependencies we have learned when we were covering the schedule management plan. Also, the resource constraints or scope gaps that could impact the project execution. You may also be asked to evaluate whether the project continues to provide a value, considering factors like changing stakeholder needs, cost benefit analysis, or risk exposure. So, a strong understanding of project integration management and progress collaboration is essential for answering these questions correctly. The third point under this task is we have to collect and analyze data to make informed project decisions. The PMP questions here may assess how well you can gather and analyze project data to support decision making. Data sources include the work performance data, the variance analysis, or earned value management, or the EVM, and risk assessment. You may be required to determine whether a project is on track or if a corrective actions are needed. The key techniques here we covered earlier including the trend analysis, the Monte Carlo simulation, and predictive forecasting to anticipate potential deviations from the project plan. The last point we have under this task is to determine critical information requirements. So, effective project decision making relies on identifying and prioritizing critical information needs. And here the exam will test your ability to define the key performance indicators or the KPIs, for example, or establish a reporting structure and determine the most relevant data sources for tracking the progress. You might encounter scenarios requiring you to recommend, for example, a dashboards or reporting formats or communication channels that ensures the stakeholder receives timely and relevant project updates. And my final exam tip here is that we say that the PMP exam often integrate the project planning with monitoring, execute, execute the execution phase, and stakeholder management. So be prepared for scenario-based questions requiring you to resolve conflicts between project plans, interpret the performance data, and recommend corrective actions. So strong knowledge here and of the also the created change control process, dependency management, and business value analysis will help you answer these questions effectively. The 10th task here we have is to manage the project changes. As we have discussed many times about how to handle changes, how to assess the impact, how to apply the changes. So, and this task, it will focus again on managing the project changes under the process domain, since it has a well-defined process. So change, as we say, that cannot be avoided in any project. The PMP exam here will test your ability to proactively manage, evaluate, and implement changes while minimizing the disruption. Expect scenario based questions that assess how to identify the need for change, follow a structured change, the change management process, and to determine the appropriate responses to keep the project aligned with the objectives. First point under this task is we have to cover is to anticipate and embrace the need of change, which means the follow the change management practices. So the exam questions here may present situation where scope or schedule or cost constraints shift. Let's say, let's say a stakeholder, for example, requests or market changing market conditions or risk events. You need or you must recognize early warning signs that indicate potential changes and apply change management best practices. This includes establishing a change control system, which is known as the CCS, or using impact analysis to assess the changes and ensuring stakeholders' engagement in decision-making process. A strong understanding of integrated change control is essential for answering these questions. So ensure that you understand what are the steps, who has to be involved in the evaluation, how you apply for the change request, how you assess the impact on the project constraints. So be prepared to, to test your ability on to manage and evaluate and implement these changes with, of course, with the structured approach that we have discussed. Next, we have to determine the strategy to handle the change. So a structured approach to change is critical to maintain project stability. PMP questions may assess your ability to determine the best change management strategy based on the project constraints or urgency and impact. And this involves evaluating the change request, determining if it aligns with the business objectives, and assessing its effect on the triple constraints, which is the scope, time, and cost. So you must also identify whether the change requires a formal approval from the Change Control Board or the CCB, or if it can be handled through adaptive or agile change practices. So it depends on the, let's say, the change methodology that or the project methodology that you're running your project into that you have to follow. And this will be our next topic. And the 10th task here is to execute change management strategy according to the methodology. So once a change is approved, it must be implemented using an appropriate methodology. For example, in predictive project, it follows a formal change control process, including documentation, approval, and updates to the project baselines. However, in agile projects, changes are embarrassed through iterative backlog refinement and sprint planning. So the exam questions here may require you to choose the best execution approach based on the project methodology, ensuring a minimal disruption while maintaining stakeholder alignment. So ensure to understand the type of project that you are running, Based on that, you need to determine what are the process in case, as we say, that if it's a waterfall, we need to follow this change control process by understanding the impact of the change, submitting the change, getting the approval, and then changing or updating the baselines. On the other hand, agile is different by understanding the change, assessing it based on its risk and value, and then applying that changes to be, let's say, an iterative, the iterative backlog refinement sessions, and then it goes to the sprint planning and then sprint execution. We are going to cover this in detail when uh, which we have already covered on the agile section. And the fourth and last point here we have under this task is to determine a change response to move the project forward. So the PMP exam may test your ability here to decide how to proceed after a change is introduced. You will need to update the project plans, for example, to reallocate the resources and to adjust the schedules, or maybe mitigate a new risk that it can be a reason for that change. While ensuring continuous progress, you may also be asked on also how to manage the stakeholder expectation by communicating a change impact effectively. And remember, the correct answers here will demonstrate your ability to maintain the project momentum while balancing the flexibility and control. And the final exam tip here we talked on this task is that we say that the PMP exam frequently integrates also the change management with risk, stakeholder, and communication management. So be prepared for scenario based questions that require you to evaluate change impact, to determine the appropriate responses, and how to ensure the alignment with the governance structure that your organizations follow. So it's important to understand the formal when we talked about the predictive and we talked about the adaptive change management when handling agile project approaches, which is critical for answering these questions correctly. Now let's talk about the 11th task as part of the process domain. So this task will talk about planning and managing the procurement. We have, let's say, key points that we're going to discuss each of them and how to expect questions about. So the PMP exam here will evaluate your ability to identify, to acquire, and manage the external resources, which is needed to execute the project successfully. So expect scenario-based questions on defining the procurement needs, for example, managing the contracts and ensuring suppliers deliver as expected while aligning with the project constraints. So a strong knowledge of procurement planning, contract types, and risk allocation is essential for this task. And to start with the first point will cover on this task is to define the resource requirements and needs. The exam here may test your ability to determine what sources or needed resources like the people or materials or services are required based on the project scope, schedule, and budget. And this involves resource estimation techniques such as bottom up estimating, analogous estimating, and parametric estimating. You must also consider whether, let's say, the resources should be procured externally or sourced internally. We call them make or buy analysis. Next, we have you need to communicate the resource requirements. So, once the resource needs are defined, they must be communicated effectively to internal and external stakeholders. So, you might expect some questions here about on procurement documents like the request for proposals or RFP, what is its purpose, or for example, the request for quotation or the RFQ, sometimes the statement of work or the SOW. So clear communication ensures that the vendors um, understand the requirements, reducing the risk for procurement dispute later. Next, we have is to manage the suppliers' contracts. The procurement management involves contract negotiation, performance monitoring, and risk management. And if you recall, when we were covering during the planning phase, when we talked about the procurement planning, talked about its important, the importance of that, let's say, phase during the planning phase, how to manage it, discuss all of these types of contracts, the different types of contracts. So the PMP exam will test your ability and how to select and manage the contract types. For example, we talked about the fixed price contracts, which is best for well defined scope, and that will shift the risk to the seller. Also, we talked about the cost reimbursable contracts, which is used when the scope is uncertain, and that will shift the risk completely to the buyer. We also talked about the third part or the third type of contract here, which is the time and material contracts, which is common for staff augmentation and flexible service needs. So expect these questions, which may also involve handling supplier performance issues or enforcing contract terms and managing the disputes. And the third point here we have is to plan and manage the procurement strategy. The PMP exam questions here may assess your ability on how you can develop the procurement strategy, ensuring the alignment with the project objectives. And this will include determining the contract's structure or the risk allocation and vendor selection criteria and procurement scheduling. The other hand, you have an agile environments. Procurement strategies often emphasize the flexibility and iterative contracting rather than just rigid and long-term agreements. The fourth point we have here is to, or the fourth step is to develop a delivery solution. So once the procurement is in place, the focus shifts to ensure a timely and quality delivery. So expect questions on vendor performance, KPIs or SLAs, risk mitigation strategies, and the issue resolution. In some cases, contract adjustment may be necessary to accommodate the project changes, requiring contract amendments or renegotiations. The final exam tip here I have to say is that the PMP exam will frequently integrate the procurement with risk, cost, and stakeholder management. So be prepared for scenario-based questions that requires you to select the right contract type, for example, or addressing the procurement risks associated with the procurement, let's say, strategy, and also managing the suppliers' relationships effectively. So ensure that understanding the procurement process, the contract types, and risk sharing strategies is essential for answering these questions correctly.